Getting better with money is not easy. So the most popular content on the internet usually involves making money, investing, and stock trading, but that can be a trap if you don't have the right fundamentals. Keeping track of my spending has been the most influential habit of my life, and I'm here to tell you about why practicing this simple habit can change your entire life and your entire perspective on money. It all started here at this Fleming's Steakhouse at Stanford Shopping Center on March 4th, 2014. No, it wasn't the place where I first tracked my spending, but rather it was a meeting with someone I had never met before. If you had told me back then that this person I'd meet only one time in my life would have such a huge impact on how I live my life, I probably would not have believed you. That person's name was Jerry, and I had literally been introduced to him via email through a random connection of my family's, so a car salesman knew Jerry because he went to school with him. He offered to put me in touch with Jerry, and all I knew really about Jerry was that he was a successful guy from Hong Kong. He owned a trading firm, and there weren't really any other details besides that. After emailing a bit back and forth, we met on March 4th at that steakhouse, Fleming's, and while secretly I might have wanted a job with his trading firm, I walked away with something way better, which was a lesson on personal finance that would change the entire course of my life. During our chat, I learned that Jerry had actually recently sold his trading firm, which had made him a cool 9+ figures, so he wouldn't have even had a job for me anyways. As our chat went on, I kind of realized that this guy really loved money and he really loved living a flashy lifestyle. He kept showing me videos of himself racing Ferraris and jet setting around the world. From what I can remember from our meeting, he was happy with his success and wanted to enjoy it, so there was no judgment on my part. He was a successful guy and I simply wasn't at the time. I would say 85 out of our 90-minute conversation was mostly about his adventures and conquests. I didn't really actually think I'd learned anything from him at all. At the very end of our conversation, he asked me a question, which was, do I ever want to start a business one day? And to which I replied, of course. And that's when I vividly remember him asking me the following questions. Number one, do I track my expenses? To which I replied, no. And so then he retorted, well, how do you expect to run a business if you can't even track your personal life? These two questions would be the basis for where I am today. He offered me a challenge at the end of that conversation, which was to track my expenses for 90 days, every single expense, and promised that I would learn a lot from doing this. So it's been about 2,668 days now, and well, I haven't stopped. So what have I learned from this, and what has tracking my expenses actually done for me? And also, what can it do for you? Let's talk about that. I've learned 4 main lessons from tracking my expenses that I'd like to share with you today. First, the lesson of putting my ego aside. In the early days of tracking my expenses, I'd write down what I spent money on and feel guilty anytime I spent a large sum of money. When I first started to track my spending, I felt like the first few days were like a game. I wanted to see how little I could spend to validate myself and my ego. Prior to trying this for 90 days, I always thought of myself as someone who was reasonable with their expenses or someone who didn't spend a lot frivolously. So naturally, I made a lot of excuses in my head about whenever I did have a larger expense. So I'd say things to myself like, oh, this is just a one-time thing. Next week, this won't happen. Or, oh, my average spending is a lot lower than this. But tracking my spending was actually a huge slap in the face. It made me realize that I do in fact spend a lot of money, sometimes from large transactions, but mostly from the sum of many small purchases. I'm sure a lot of us are like this. We may get a cup of coffee in the morning, we might get some lunch, a snack in the afternoon, or maybe some impulse purchases whenever we're out shopping or with friends. These small $5 to $10 purchases really add up over the course of the day, and before you know it, you've spent a large amount of money, like $100, $150 on what's just a normal day. So the mere practice of tracking my expenses made me face what I was spending head on. I had to give ordinary purchases more consideration. I also realized that my true spending would need to take into account larger purchases. Because let's say you have one large purchase a month. Maybe you spend $300 on a weekend trip every month. Well, that's still an extra average of $10 more per day. So while you think you might average $20 a day in spending, if you did have one large purchase like that weekend trip every single month, your average daily spend is a lot higher. About a year into tracking my spending, I started to view my spending a lot differently. I realized that after a while, I stopped feeling guilty about those large purchases. Rather, I was starting to look at my spending objectively, like my life was a business and the expenses were necessary just for my life to keep going. It started to become an automatic process of spending and tracking, spending, then tracking, and the more automatic it got, the less attached I got to my own spending, and I was able to continue to look at my entire financial picture objectively without emotion. This disassociation of my spending and my emotions was incredibly powerful. I would start to identify trends and patterns, and if my spending ever started to get out of control, I'd be able to quickly rein it back in. The second lesson is that tracking my spending really taught me how to grow anything. Now hear me out. By having one consistent habit throughout my life, I learned that keeping a habit up is quite easy as long as you put a very small amount of effort into it each and every single day. It's this basis of consistency that has allowed me to grow my own businesses, grow my TikTok, and my YouTube channels as well. There's no real secret of building a good business or YouTube channel or being good at many things in life. If you can just stay consistent, do things that progress you towards your goal every week or every day, in a few years, you'll definitely have something to show for it. It's the same reason why financially it makes sense to consistently invest. By doing so over time, you're gonna have way more to show for it than someone who doesn't consistently invest. The third lesson I learned was that it just made me good with money. I know it seems trivial, but once you understand how much you're spending on average, you can then take your income and figure out a plan on how to allocate your money. Allocating your money is some of the most fun that you can have, and not to mention, it instantly means that you're actually gonna be good with your money, and it all comes from this simple habit alone. I personally love running different situations on my Excel spreadsheets and seeing how much money I need to make or I need to save up for different goals or milestones of mine. I like figuring out how to divvy up and allocate my money towards different things like savings, retirement, paying off debt, collectibles, stocks, real estate, crypto. That's where I get most of my joy. Another nice bonus is that if you start to track your net worth, you can see how much better your financial situation gets over time as well. The fourth lesson that I learned from tracking my spending is that it really helped me with lifestyle inflation. As my income grew, my expenses would naturally creep up, but by tracking my spending, I knew exactly when my spending was getting a little bit out of control so that I could rein it back in. That means I can continue to live below my means and increase the gap between my spending and my income. Having a really low amount of spending and combining it with a higher income means that you'll reach financial independence faster than ever. So, should everyone do this? Well, the answer is maybe. If you're the type of person who wants self-improvement in the financial aspect of your life, I would like to issue you the same 90-day challenge that was issued to me back in 2014. If you can track your spending for 90 straight days, I do think that you're gonna learn a lot more about your own spending habits and where your money goes. I do wanna say that I've actually issued this exact challenge to 5 or 6 different friends of mine over the past 7 years, and not a single one of them has ever made it past 2 weeks. There is something inherently difficult about staying disciplined for that long for 90 straight days. You do need to make it a priority in your life if you really want to do it. Now, when it comes to tracking your expenses, the more detailed you can track where your money is going, the better. And that's because the more info we have at the end of, say, 30, 60, or 90 days, the more that we can actually plan ahead and accordingly invest and allocate our money. Okay, so how should you do this if you do want to do this? There are a few steps that you need to do, but the first thing you need is somewhere to track your expenses. This can be totally up to you. You can write down your expenses at the end of each day, or you can put it in your notes on your phone. I personally just use a free app from the App Store called Spending Tracker, and every time I spend money, I just manually input each expense into my spending tracker. I personally do not put in any recurring expenses. Rather, I just track that in a separate spreadsheet, which I'll get into a little bit. Second, whenever you spend money, write it down. I personally have found that writing it down right after I spend that amount is the easiest thing for me. So after I buy a coffee or dinner, let's say, I'll just go right into my spending tracker and log it. If you're someone who uses Mint.com or something like You Need a Budget to automate it, that's fine too. Just make sure you know where it's being tracked. Third, at the end of each month, on the 30th or the 31st for me, I sum up all of my expenses and I log it into my spreadsheet. The method in which you do this doesn't really matter, but the main point I'm trying to drive home is that you need a place to record your progress. It's kind of like journaling in that way. So after you basically record your progress every single month, you analyze your expenses and see how you can improve on a weekly or monthly basis. I find that this practice alone will transform yourself from someone who is bad with money to someone who is very good with money. I'm always personally fascinated to see what the mix of my expenses look like on a month-to-month basis and how it changes over time. For example, back in 2015, my first full year of tracking, I spent an average of $600 a month on eating out and no money on groceries. These days, that number is closer to $439 a month, and groceries account for around 20% of my food costs. Now, obviously, the challenge was so addicting when it was first issued to me that I haven't stopped for over 7 years, or as the title implies, 2,668 days. Now, will I ever stop? I'm not too sure. I don't really even need to keep track of my expenses anymore, but I do it because it's just a habit now and it's a part of who I am. And this is all thanks to a guy named Jerry that I met one time. So Jerry, if you are out there watching this, I don't think you will be, but thank you. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a like on it and subscribe to my channel for more videos from me, and let me know in the comments if you start tracking your spending. As always, get some free stocks with the links in the description down below, and thanks to all my Patreon supporters. I appreciate you guys following me and being here. I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, peace.